Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now it's the start of a new year. The weather is cold and many of us are back at work after the break. Invariably, this is the time we start trying to plan a holiday in the sun. This, though, is a year with a big difference, with the UK due to leave the European Union on March the 29th. So what impact is Brexit likely to have if you want to book a holiday abroad? Our Consumer Affairs correspondent Coletta Smith has been finding out.
Back home and back to work after Christmas. This is the moment people's thoughts turn to the next getaway. But this year's going to be different, whether you're heading to Europe or beyond.
It's a worry that flights will become too expensive. You know, you do try to come home to see family and stuff 3 or 4 times a year, and if that gets too expensive, it is a bit of a worry.
I think people will be worried about whether they're going to need a visa, but it doesn't stop them travelling to other sort of parts of the world.
I'm nothing boots in advance. I don't know about Brexit, in honesty. Does anybody understand Brexit? Because I definitely don't.
The government say passengers can book their trips with confidence, and the European Union have confirmed even if there's no deal, we won't need a visa to travel to Europe.
One of the biggest Brexit impacts on holidays, whether or not there's a deal reached, will be on the price of them. The pound has bounced around loads over the last couple of months on Brexit news, and that makes it really hard to plan in advance, to plan ahead exactly how much value you're going to get for the pound when you get on holiday. One impact could be on flights. They're likely to increase in price because most airlines buy fuel in dollars.
That's a rate of 1.086.
As for spending money, finding the best time to buy currency won't be easy this year.
My advice to customers would be to wait until they're ready to buy just before they go away and check the rate then. I can't see it being any great increases in the rates like they used to be.
So if you're going on holiday this summer, it's about holding your nerve then?
Yes, unless they have to go away immediately and you need your currency, then of course you need to purchase it. Otherwise, if you're not going till the summer, I would wait.
The Easter break is just a few weeks after the Brexit deadline, and if there's no deal, you'll need at least 6 months left on your passport to travel to Europe. And you may need an international driving permit to hire a car. For now, it's political details thrashed out on the ground in Westminster that will decide. Coletta Smith, BBC News in Manchester.
Well, on the ground in Westminster, Theresa May will be trying to persuade MPs to back her Brexit agreement later this month. Let's talk now to our political correspondent, Chris Mason, who's there for us now. Chris, MPs are back in the Commons next week. Has anything changed over the winter break?
Rita, if you needed any further proof that fun is cancelled, that Christmas is over, that the tree is coming down, that the trundle back to work is on, well, the pause button on Brexit chat in the news is being lifted off, and that all-consuming noise before Christmas is going to resume. But has anything actually changed, as you ask? Short answer, no. The Democratic Unionist Party, Northern Ireland Party that props up Theresa May in government, they didn't like the withdrawal agreement before Christmas, and guess what? They still don't like it, and neither do a shed load of Conservative MPs. They don't like this so-called backstop, the insurance policy to ensure that the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic remains open under any circumstances. Now, the Prime Minister has spent Christmas making telephone calls. She was on the phone to Jean-Claude Juncker of the European Commission this afternoon, but she doesn't seem to have secured enough from them to persuade enough people here to change their minds. And so still, it looks like she'll lose this big vote coming up in a couple of weeks' time. MPs return here on Monday. They'll start debating the withdrawal agreement in the middle of the week. We expect the vote to be a week on Tuesday. One final fact, Brexit is due to happen 12 weeks tonight.
Chris, many thanks. Chris Mason there in Westminster.
Theresa May has spoken with the European Commission President this afternoon in yet another bid to get a better Brexit deal from Brussels. It is her first conversation with Jean-Claude Juncker since the new year and comes as 150 UK universities have warned leaving the EU with no deal could cause a research crisis. Our political correspondent Carl Dinnan reports.
When they carry out experiments, scientists usually have a pretty good idea of what's going to happen. The Brexit experiment is different. There might or might not be a deal in place by the time we leave, And university leaders say no deal would threaten vital research, like the proton beam cancer therapy being developed at Manchester University.
It particularly worries me because we're part of large European funding initiatives. We're leading an initiative on further development of proton beam across Europe, and we also rely on many European talented staff and students for our research and as part of our education.
Recent figures show British universities received £877 million a year from the EU, 15% of their total income from research grants and contracts. EU students also bring in money, but the total number of those enrolling at the top universities is down 3%. And there's been a 9% fall in the number of EU postgraduate research students joining the leading universities.
These are some of our best students, and we've seen now a year-on-year decline of 9% a year in terms of enrolments in our universities. And these are our best students. They're the ones who are going to go on and become the leaders in research or the academic teachers of the next generation of students coming to our universities.
The university sector has been broadly opposed to leaving the EU, but supporters of Brexit say that in this and other areas, a no-deal Brexit is not as worrying as some have suggested.
Inevitably there's risk, there is potential disruption if the EU refuse to cooperate, but what the important thing is for the UK government to do is to prepare for all eventualities, to make sure that we're ready for leaving without a deal.
The government has promised to protect some research funding in the event of a no-deal Brexit, but today the Universities and Science Minister said university leaders were right to emphasise the issues with leaving the European Union without a deal.
Carl, we know that MPs here are returning next week. Is that why the Prime Minister has been so busy speaking to European leaders about her Brexit deal?
Yes, that's exactly why she continued a series of phone calls with senior EU figures with that call to President Juncker today. Downing Street haven't said how the call went, although the EU insisted it had been a friendly conversation, which is notable because the last time these two spoke publicly at the European Council back in December, it was a tense, bordering on angry affair as the television cameras picked it up. Of course, Mrs May is trying to get the reassurances that MPs here want before they vote on her Brexit deal the week after next. She hasn't got those assurances as far as anybody is aware, and so no deal planning continues apace. And it will continue on Monday with the Department for Transport running a test run for no deal plans in Kent. They will be hiring up to 150 lorries to see if they can put them all on an airfield in Kent to use it as a huge car park in case of disruption at Dover in the case of no deal. All intended to show the EU that Britain is ready for it if it happens.
Carl, thank you.
Now, Theresa May continued seeking concessions from the EU today that she hopes will convince seemingly intransigent MPs to back her withdrawal agreement. She was dealt a further blow this morning. A YouGov poll commissioned by The Telegraph found that almost 60% of Conservative Party MPs would back leaving without a deal, rather than supporting the one that she hopes to get through Parliament in 2 weeks' time. Our political correspondent Michael Crick is in Westminster. Michael.
Well, the Prime Minister was continuing her efforts to get reassurances from the Europeans about the famous Irish backstop, the insurance policy to ensure there is no hard border in Ireland. She was on the phone this afternoon to the President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker. That was friendly, according to the Commission, and they agreed to keep in touch next week. But no details of what was said. No details either from Downing Street as to who are the other European leaders Mrs May's spoken to in the last few days, or indeed the numbers of people she's spoken to. But we are going to see more details of the government's preparations for no deal. You heard earlier from Rod Mackenzie of the Road Haulage Association about the plans for Operation Brock on Monday in Kent, involving up to 150 lorries at Manston Airport and other places. Now, there's the possibility, there's the suggestion this is all political theatre and scaremongering, and I suspect there may be some people in government who rather hope that this dress rehearsal on Monday goes disastrously wrong and acts as a warning to the kind of to Conservative MPs as to the kind of disruption and chaos that might ensue if there is no deal. On the other hand, the poll figures that you cited earlier would rather suggest that many Conservative ordinary members aren't that worried about the possibility of no deal, and perhaps not MPs either. And I think in the next few days you're going to see much more emphasis placed by Number 10 and the government on the possibility of there being no Brexit, that if MPs vote down the withdrawal agreement, that could lead to the Commons voting for a second referendum. I don't think there are the votes in the Commons for that right now, but that could change.
Michael, thanks very much. And 1,000 police officers across England and Scotland are reportedly being trained up for possible deployment to Northern Ireland in case there's a surge in violence after a no-deal Brexit, although a senior police commander has insisted it's purely a precautionary measure and he didn't expect to need reinforcements. Well, I'm joined now from Belfast by Mark Lindsay, chairperson of the Police Federation for Northern Ireland. Thanks for coming on the programme. Do you welcome these extra 1,000 English and Scottish police officers, if indeed they're needed?
Yes, well, the first thing we have to acknowledge is that this isn't a unique set of circumstances. These officers have been being trained for deployment in Northern Ireland using mutual aid for some time now. In fact, the first time we saw them deployed was in 2013 at G8. I think the headline here is that they need to be trained because Northern Ireland is a bespoke environment, and this bespoke training needs to take place to allow them to operate in what is a high-threat environment with a severe terrorist threat.
I mean, you call it a bespoke environment. I mean, you know, a lot of people out there might forget the recent history of Northern Ireland, and there is real potential for trouble of extremists wanting to exploit the chaos of a possible no-deal Brexit.
Yeah, well, we've seen that time and time again where there is an issue, no matter what the issue is in Northern Ireland, that people do tend to come onto the streets, that for either a short period of time or a more protracted period of time, that we do see some serious public order and indeed terrorist-related violence as a result of that. So this is purely part of contingency planning that has taken place over the years. We don't certainly expect to see 1,000 deployed at once. These officers would be deployed in tranches. It would take into consideration their own annual leave, their own availability from their own forces. So while they'll be coming in tranches, maybe of 100 at a time, that's the way we would expect them to arrive.
But they will, some of them, I mean, maybe not all of them, but some of them you expect to turn up on the 29th of March.
Well, I think all Northern Ireland, all PSNI resources would have to be exhausted first. The PSNI can pull together some 58 public order units if required. These officers here are only used whenever that goes on for a protracted period of time, and our officers need relieved in some regard. So we wouldn't expect to see them, but we certainly expect to see that the contingency is there if needed. But I think it's an extreme measure for extreme circumstances, and obviously we don't know what those extreme circumstances are going to be, if anything, yet.
Is there a problem, especially for Republicans, with English and Scottish police officers on the streets of places like Belfast?
I don't think so. I think, you know, what we're trying to do here is keep the community safe, is to stop the country falling into large-scale public order. This will be purely a contingency. I don't see that there's any issue with these officers coming over. At the end of the day, they were over in 2013, and there was a contingency there for the flag protest as well, and that received no adverse comment from those communities.
Did you ever expect to have to come up with these contingencies at the time of the referendum itself?
Well, I think it's always been on the cards. I think that you know, policing in Northern Ireland is a unique environment, particularly along the border area. Our officers are working there under a severe terrorist threat, which means an attack is highly likely. Normal policing there requires officers to move around in 4 vehicle armoured convoys. Right. Etc., etc. So this is just another area where we need proper resource enough policing in Northern Ireland, and this is a contingency in lieu of this.
Mark Lindsay, thank you very much indeed. Now, university leaders have warned that a no-deal Brexit, here it is again, could be an academic, cultural and scientific setback from which it could take decades to recover. And they're right to worry, according to the university's minister, who agreed that there would be significant issues. The Russell Group of leading universities says that key areas of research, from groundbreaking cancer treatments to technology to climate change, could be compromised without access to EU funding programmes. Our North of England correspondent Claire Fallon has a story.
In the science labs of Manchester University, they're unpicking the genetics of prostate cancer. From DNA to Dolly the sheep, penicillin and the first computer. For decades, British universities have been leading us into the future. But now, they claim their own future is at stake if we leave the EU with no deal.
In terms of research, we get large sums of money from the European Union. Actually, the UK does very well in terms of research funding from the European Union. But again, it's not just about the money. It's about being part of large collaborative projects.
But the reality is that Manchester University has always been at the forefront of huge scientific developments, from Rutherford to Turing. You've been doing it long before you had European money.
We have. It's a little more difficult now, though. I think the days of the individual researcher are somewhat gone, and of course tackling big global problems now requires large teams of people with very different but complementary expertise.
In recent years, UK universities have been awarded billions in EU money. The government's guaranteed to fill the gap for some, but not all of the projects that already have funding. In a letter, leading university figures warn research into cancer treatments and climate change could be compromised, that world-leading academics might leave, that it would take decades to recover.
Universities aren't just institutions of learning. Increasingly, they're global brands and businesses, and their ability to attract overseas students is a crucial part of how they bring in money.
Already, the number of students from other EU countries coming to the UK's leading universities is down. Christina arrived from Berlin last week. She's a medical student and pretty pragmatic, considering the uncertainty.
If there is no deal and probably I have to go, I have no clue. But we had to sign up for it, so they said probably you have to split your semesters, or you have to go, or you cannot finish. So
they've actually said to you that if there's a no-deal Brexit, you might have to go back in the middle of your studies.
They don't know. I think there is a special agreement for the Erasmus students, so I hope it will not happen, but...
The government insists, deal or no deal, Britain will be a world leader. Top scientists and researchers will want to be here. Not everyone shares that optimism. Claire Fallon, Channel 4 News, Manchester.